Hi, and welcome back to Ivy English. I'm Karen.
And I'm Chris Gorski.
Today is March 22nd. Today we have part one of a two-part article entitled, The Evolution of the Cinema. How has it changed?
So the cinema is just the theater or the movie theater. It's actually from an old Greek word that means kinesthetic. It means to move or to touch, to feel. There's some kind of movement here. Today we don't really see that because it's buried under the French. But really, the origin of this word cinema means moving picture. That's a movie theater.
And you will find it in European languages. So it's cinema in French. It's used in British English. It is cine in Spanish. And it's kino in German. They pronounce the C with a K sound. Kino is the word for theater. There's
the German root or the Greek root there.
That's right. It's much more authentic. So we're going to find out how films developed. How have they changed since they first started? Here's paragraph 1. You have probably enjoyed watching a film on the silver screen at some point. But how often have you gone in the past year? Across the world, the number of people going to movie theaters has decreased significantly due to the COVID-19 pandemic, leading many people to worry about the future of movie theaters. These public venues were once an inseparable part of the cinema industry, but in the 21st century, that may be changing.
The first movie theater opened in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1905. It was very different from the theaters we know today. The first films were only 15 or 20 minutes long and used lights to cast shadows of the film onto white sheets. These silent, black and white films continued to amaze crowds for over 20 years.
In 1927, The Jazz Singer was the first full-length film with spoken dialogue and a soundtrack to hit the theaters. It marked the end of silent films and the rise of talkies. After a few decades, especially in the 1950s, movies filmed in color were popularized as they became more affordable to produce. By the 1960s, almost every medium-sized city in the U.S. had its own movie theater. The theater became a place for young people to gather and for families to spend an evening on the weekends.
Over the next 50 years, people around the world shared the cultural experience of the modern movie theater. People sat in crowded theaters, surrounded by strangers, while they laughed and cried at the stories on the screen. It was a way to share entertainment among friends and the broader community. However, due to social and technological changes, this kind of public entertainment experience is on the decline. In the future, going to the movies may become an act of 20th century nostalgia.
Now, I'm going to mention 3 reasons why I have never gone to the movies very often. Number 1 is when I'm sitting in my seat, often the soles of my shoes would stick to the floor.
Disgusting.
Did that ever happen to you?
Yeah, a little bit. It didn't really bother me terribly much.
It's disgusting.
It is.
Your shoes are sticking to the floor.
I mean, you probably don't go into many men's bathrooms, but...
Well, yeah, in a bathroom, you can kind of expect people to be sloppy, but it's a theater. I paid to get in. It's not cheap. And somebody's Coke is now making my shoes stick to the floor.
I just wonder who these people are. I've never once spilled, my drink. There's a cup holder. I suppose, there's a lot of young people that go to theaters and they're being silly and maybe therefore less careful and maybe spilling more. I don't know. It never personally bothered me.
The theater owner is responsible for cleaning up. If you're going to sell drinks, people are going to spill. It's just the way of the world. So that really, really, really put me off. The second reason was they are freezing cold. Every time I've gone to a movie theater, the air conditioning was on way, way too strong. I was so cold. I would pull on the sweater, whatever I brought with me. I was still cold. What is the point of that? You want people to be comfortable.
I have the answer.
What?
I know the answer to this, actually.
Okay.
So as a matter of fact, air conditioning in theaters was a prime advertising feature for a very long time for theaters. Movie theaters were one of the first and only places you can find air conditioning. Air conditioning was, in fact, invented in my hometown in Buffalo for industrial processes. That's right. And so these extremely hot factories needed to be cooled down, and that's why air conditioning was invented. And then they were eventually brought over to movie theaters, which were quite stuffy places. And they would advertise freezing cold bricks of ice, like ice cold theaters.
I remember that.
That was the feature. And I think it's just one of those things that we'll discuss later. It's just a tradition to be freezing cold.
But that makes you uncomfortable. The point is to make you more comfortable. I cannot accept this. Why do they overdo it? Practice moderation. That is number 2.
I love this soapbox. Keep going.
Number 3. I would often sit like in the second row.
Like your neck all the way up.
No. Actually, I could accept that because it was a big screen and I could see okay. It was boom. And it would just break my eardrums. The sound was too loud. So sticky floors, too cold air conditioning, the sound is ruining my hearing. Why would I want to go to a movie theater?
I've sat in the second row for a theater once, and I did not enjoy that experience. I personally am okay with that. The loudness of a theater, especially for an action or science fiction movie, for me, that's a net positive. But all 3 of these things, I think, are very rational reasons why you would not enjoy a theater. Like, I don't personally share your opinions, but your conclusion based on them is extremely logical, and I see why you feel this way.
That's right. And afterwards, I realized it was not worth paying all that money to feel miserable for something that was supposed to be relaxation.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm getting down from my soapbox now. If you get up on a soapbox, that's when you get up and you give a speech. Usually you're trying to convince people of something. Let's go back to the beginning. I'm not trying to convince you to avoid theaters, but they have not fixed these problems. Lately, the floors have been cleaner, I have to say, but they're just as cold and they're just as loud. So anyway, the evolution of the cinema, how has it changed is our title. Evolution is growing from a very primitive state, slowly developing and becoming more sophisticated. And cinema, for me, is still a really fancy word, even though I've studied European languages. It sounds fancy in American English. We just call them movies. Even film is a fancy word.
I agree.
Let's go watch a film. That's usually a foreign film.
That's right. You're watching something with subtitles in black and white with an opera singer and the rose slowly dying in the window. That's a film. That's where you go see to the cinema. When you go see a comedy, when you go see a Marvel action movie, you're going to the theater. You're going to the movie theater. You're going to the movies.
All right. So that's 3 levels of, I would say, formality and fanciness. Movies is the most common word, then film is fancier, cinema is really fancy. Okay, our first paragraph. You have probably enjoyed watching a film on the silver screen at some point, but how often have you gone in the past year? Now, the thing I think that you may need explained to you, but maybe not, is silver screen, because that is a synonym. It's another word for movies, because I guess it reflects back at you, and it's in contrast to the small screen, right?
That's
the little
right.
Screen.
People didn't have any screens at home at the time when movie theaters were invented. The first movie theaters, as we see in paragraph 2, was just a white sheet. And what they soon realized is if you painted that sheet with a silver-colored paint, it might have silver in it, but it was just more like silver-colored. It would reflect better, but it created that kind of halo effect that we think of in old black and white movies. So the center would be very bright, but everything on the periphery, on the edges, would be darkened.
Or there would be this reflection in the middle where it was especially bright.
That's right.
Yeah.
And by the 1920s, that had died out, but the name stuck. Tradition is a big part of the movie business.
That's right. So maybe you have gone to a movie theater. They're kind of understating here. I think just about everybody has, I'm guessing.
So, well, of course, I've gone to the theater, but as we see in the second part of the sentence, I haven't gone in the past year.
So we fit into what they're saying.
We definitely fit this, yeah.
Yeah, we're typical. All right, next sentence. Across the world, the number of people going to movie theaters has decreased significantly due to the COVID-19 pandemic, leading many people to worry about the future of movie theaters. This is kind of a long sentence, but it's a good sentence. Just take it bit by bit. But I think that there were a lot of really pessimistic predictions in the thick of the pandemic. So when we were first into it, people stopped going anywhere. We were all locked up in our homes getting depressed, not going anywhere except when we had to eat. So, yeah, a lot of things, we have a lot of industries just collapsed. One of them was theaters, another was the airline industry.
My school, without giving too much away about myself, is extremely close to a movie theater and not a major movie theater in Taipei. And during the thick of the pandemic, it was a ghost town.
Yeah.
We were the only people in the building, and we were teaching remotely. It was crazy to see this theater just basically abandoned. It was a weird thing to see.
Yeah, and it's really scary because a lot of people rely on these things for their livelihoods. There were so many industries that were affected in this way, with so many people out of work, companies going out of business. That is really scary. Okay, our next sentence. These public venues were once an inseparable part of the cinema industry. But in the 21st century, that may be changing.
So a venue is a really fancy word for a place. Typically, you'll have your wedding at a venue.
That's right. Okay, it means a place where something happens. Okay, and what is the venue? Oh, it's a church or it's a school, for example.
Let's continue to our second paragraph. The first movie theater opened in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1905.
Way back in 1905, that was the first time we had a theater, but it wasn't quite like a modern theater yet.
That's right. We had moving pictures. You'd stick a penny in there or a buffalo nickel or something, and you would
crank it,
and the pictures would flip by. But now this was an automatic process. It was very different from the theaters we know today.
And we already kind of suggested that.
The first films were only 15 or 20 minutes long and used lights to cast shadows of the film onto white sheets.
They were just trying out this method. And of course, things don't come completely developed right at the beginning. It worked for a while, and even though it was kind of primitive, it still really caught on.
These silent, black and white films continued to amaze crowds for over 20 years.
That's a long time to last for a primitive technology. That shows it really filled a need.
So I was thinking that when they played these movies, they often have live music accompaniment.
Right.
You have a person playing piano. But we would never call it piano. It was always like piani. Like you would say like piani, with this kind of that Western cowboy way. Think of...
Piani. Oh, the piani.
Yeah, playing the piani. You would never play piano in the traditional sense, but
fancy.
more of that very loose, fast way of playing, almost like ragtime style jazz.
Right.
That's right. That's playing piani.
You can see it in movies and old TV series. Okay, our next paragraph. In 1927, The Jazz Singer was the first full-length film with spoken dialogue and a soundtrack to hit the theaters.
And boy, oh boy, does this soundtrack jam. I love this soundtrack.
Really?
Yes, as a matter of fact, one of my very most popular YouTube videos is a lyric video from the hit song of The Jazz Singer. There's an official name for it, but really people know it as I love to sing about the moon and the June and the spring. I love to sing. And it keeps going, and it was later turned into a Merry Melodies cartoon, like a Bugs Bunny cartoon.
That's right.
And it was known as Owl Jolson, which is a play on the name of the main actor of the movie, Al Jolson. It is a beautiful, wonderful song, and the cartoon is just as lovely. And if you ever get 10 minutes, look up I Love to Sing a Cartoon, and it is such an entertaining watch. I absolutely adore it.
See if you can maybe find a clip from the original The Jazz Singer. And I remember it was not only Bugs Bunny. You would often see similar things in Mickey Mouse. They would suddenly break into song, and it was this old style. Now, I was watching like in the very early 60s, and by then it was already very, very old. I mean, this whole style was not something that you heard like on the radio or anything. So you'll find a lot of Americana preserved in cartoons.
Now, today, The Jazz Singer is very controversial because the main actor, Al Jolson, wore what's called blackface. He was a Jewish, I think he was Lithuanian, and he wore makeup to make himself appear black. And today, this is a big no-no, extremely controversial. But, and here's my soapbox, Al Jolson fought for the rights of the fellow black actors and musicians that appeared in the movie alongside of him, including Cab Calloway, who wrote the song I Love to Sing for The Jazz Singer. When Al Jolson died, this man that we today criticize as a racist and a blackface-wearing monster, his funeral was flocked by African Americans as a person that brought representation to the cinema, to the mainstream America. He was a person that fought for equality of the fellow actors that were denied were he not available. Al Jolson was a big-time star that really wanted equality, and bless his heart.
This is a really, really complex issue in the United States, but it will often be the case that some of the treasures of African American culture, like, gospel music, jazz, rhythm and blues, all of these things, it would be hard for white people to accept them simply because they came from black people. So often you had to have a white person introduce it to bring it into the mainstream. That's basically what Elvis Presley did.
And some people look at that today as appropriating or stealing culture.
No, I don't agree.
To be fair, I understand the argument, but
do too.
I think that your argument holds more weight that a white audience could not accept black culture were it not introduced from a white person,
people.
Elvis Presley or Al Jolson.
It marked the end of silent films and the rise of talkies. And when I read this, I felt a kind of excitement because as a phonetics teacher, I'm really into sound and speech.
So a movie, of course, is a moving picture. Remember, we told you could stick a buffalo nickel or a penny into a machine and hand crank the pictures, and they would appear to move. Movies were done automatically. Talkies were now movies that talk. This IES just means a thing that does this verb.
The way they did it in the past was they would have people making the motions of speaking, but you'd have to wait until the subtitles came on a separate slide. And way at the beginning, they just had it written on a poster that they had standing on a frame or an easel. So somebody would keep changing the words and the audience would read them as they were watching the silent movie. Next sentence, after a few decades, especially in the 1950s, movies filmed in color were popularized as they became more affordable to produce. So when I was a kid, we had a black and white TV and movies were often in black and white. It was just too expensive to produce them in color. Color TVs were also really expensive.
That's a really good point, too, because color film was actually first available in 1914. Most of the footage of things like the Second World War were actually filmed in color. There was just no mass way to show you the color, and so everything appeared in black and white.
And you got used to it. It just became normal. And they had they had a rainbow screen that you could put over your television to make it look like it was in color.
Old video games used to do that.
Oh, really?
Yes, that's funny.
Okay, next sentence. By the 1960s, almost every medium-sized city in the U.S. had its own movie theater. And I can vouch for that. I thought movie theaters were just a given. They're normal.
I read something, Karen. I need to ask you this question. So I read that people described the colors in their dreams long before TVs were invented. And then there was a phenomenon noticed that after the invention of black and white theaters and movies and TV, people described their dreams strictly as black and white. They did not dream in color. And then once color television and movies became popularized, color reappeared in dreams. So you went through the black and white era. I have to ask you, do you dream in black and white or color?
I don't know how widespread that was, but I believe I remember my father saying that he dreamed in black and white.
That's interesting.
My father, he was born in 1914, for the record, and I grew up in the age where I was watching black and white TV, but color was starting to become more common.
So you were small, right? So
I was small, but I can't remember dreaming in anything but color.
That's such an interesting thing.
Idea.
Oh,
yeah.
It's so interesting.
The theater became a place for young people to gather and for families to spend an evening on the weekends. What I think of, it's a typical first date. You go to the movies.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. My first date was at a movie. What movie was it? Oh, I'll have to think of that.
I have to think about that. Okay, last paragraph.
Over the next 50 years, people around the world shared the cultural experience of the modern movie theater.
So it wasn't just the U.S., it spread all over the world.
People sat in crowded theaters surrounded by strangers while they laughed and cried at the stories on the screen. Okay, so what movies do you have the strongest memories of watching at the theater?
The Sound of Music.
Oh, what a good movie.
Yes.
It's so lovely. It's so wonderful. It's so joyful.
Yes, I was really young there. I did not go to the movies often, but this was one when it came out that I had to see. And then I went with my neighbor, Maureen, who was a few years younger than me. We went there together. We had a wonderful time. I have really vivid memories of it. And I am now in touch again with Maureen over Facebook.
Oh, I saw The Sound of Music begrudgingly. I did not want to watch this.
I love
What is this terrible movie?
It.
And then as I was watching it, it cracked my hard surface, and I said, this is just pure magic. Oh, unbelievable. Oh,
but actually, the lead male actor, he thought it was too corny, and he didn't like constantly being praised for being in that movie. He thought the movie was so corny. It's Christopher Plummer.
Well, oh well.
It was a wonderful movie. What was your first movie?
Well, not my first movie. I have very strong memories of watching The Lion King in the theater with my mom. I remember
my gosh,
watching.
That's so recent.
Well, in 94.
I know.
And I remember seeing it and thinking, this is really special. Even as a kid, I recognized how special it was. It's not my favorite movie. Have you ever walked out on a movie?
Yes.
What movie?
I can't remember. I just remember some movies were so awful. I didn't want to stay. I can remember a few. One was when I was in Singapore, I wanted to try out a Telugu movie. Not Tamil. I mean, Tamil is a bigger Southern Indian language. Telugu is a smaller one. So I thought I'm going to go listen to a Telugu movie. I couldn't stand it. I walked out. It was awful.
I think I'm too cheap to walk out on a movie. I was like, I spent my money. I'm getting every minute.
Getting my money's worth. Okay.
All right, let's continue here. It was a way to share entertainment among friends and the broader community.
I guess so. You go to a movie and then you come out and what do? You discuss it.
Yeah, so my favorite movie experience in Taipei ever was this movie called Borat, made by a comedian.
Oh, you watched Borat.
Oh, I adored this movie.
Profane.
Oh, that's what I loved about it. It was so ridiculous, and my heart broke for the translators because the audience was dead silent, and I think the audience just didn't get it, and it was like me, my wife, and then somewhere else in this packed theater, there's another foreigner, and we're howling like banshees with laughter.
I think men would do that.
Oh, my wife, we were
she thought it was funny too.
dying laughing. And the rest of the audience is like they were at a funeral. It was so quiet. And oh my God.
I know that he is brilliant. And when you listen to him talking seriously, you can see how polished and intelligent he is. But the movie is so rude.
It is.
Rude.
It's it's
Profane.
A favorite of mine. Profane is a really good. It really is.
Irreverent.
It's filthy, and
I
hilarious.
Can't take that. I'm sorry. I just can't. Next sentence.
Okay, let's continue here. However, due to social and technological changes, this kind of public entertainment experience is on the decline.
So this is getting to be a less popular way to go out and do stuff and have fun.
In the future, going to the movies may become an act of 20th century nostalgia.
And you think like, this reminds me of the days when we went to movie theaters. It sounds kind of a little too early for that. And it may be a little too early. We're going to find out more about it tomorrow when we hear part 2 of the article. Make sure you tune in then. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.